Hello everyone, Reza here. Welcome to my channel. We are going to pick up where we left off with our Unreal Engine 5 series. This is lighting part 2. Now in part 1, we went over all the basic tools in Unreal Engine 5, and in the second one, we are going to go over this modular neighborhood pack done by amazing Dokyo, and the artist was kind enough to allow me to use this project. In the previous video, we went over how to add this to our current scene. So without any further ado, let's get started. Because we already have a project folder, we really don't need to start from scratch with Unreal Engine 5. I can go to the same folder, go to For Lighting, and just double click on the modular neighborhood pack that we added to this level. So you can see, because my starter pack was enabled, I'm getting the started pack level, but I can certainly change maps. So you can see I've got starter content, I've got lesson full with the Cornell box, and in the previous video we went over how to add this modular neighborhood pack to our scene. So from here I go to maps to find my levels, and I can just make this demo map my current map. So I double click on it and it loads it into the scene. There we have it. I can just close this message log window. Now, by the way, it's totally optional, but if you ever want to make this project your default project so you don't go and change the map every single time, you can easily do that by going to project settings, and you go to maps and modes, and you can go in here and say, well, editor startup map, I want this to be demo map, or anything else that you have in mind. I personally don't mind switching levels and maps, but just in case, if you wish to make a scene a default scene, you can certainly do that. All right, here's the scene that we have, and it's a really good case study for us because we're dealing with a large scale scene, vegetation, sky, so on and so forth. So this already comes with lights, and let's do a little bit of cleanup in here before we start. I would like to put all of these static meshes into a folder. So I'm just going to select all of these guys and select this folder and put everything into this folder. We'll call it prop. That's much better. So it's the scene is the outliner is much cleaner now. Now I do have few lights in the scene which I would like to disable. I believe some of them, I couldn't help noticing some of them are here. I'm going to sort by type so I kind of see what's going on exactly. There's some blueprints in here, some foliage. So we've got landscape, which is in charge of these grasses, I believe. Yep, so you can see the turf where the creator made them with the help of the landscape tool. We've got exponential hide and fog. We would like to sort of hide that. We've got reflection capture actors in here, and that will help us to get a better reflection, but we don't have any chromie object in the scene, reflective object in the scene. Reflection is not an issue. Everything is super rough in the scene, so I'm just going to leave them there, no problem. And then we've got static meshes in this scene, so that's fine. I'm going to search for sky just to make sure that I don't have any sky enabled. You can see there's a sky sphere enabled in the prop. I'm going to hide that, and that takes care of that. I'm going to go to lighting, and probably want to clean up the filter. Going into lighting folder made by the creator of this scene, and let's see, atmospheric fog, I want to hide it. Light source, I want to hide it. And we've got post-processing. We talked about post-process volume. You can create your own through here, visual effects and post-process volume to take care of the look of the scene, but They're not directly related to lighting, so we're just going to leave that. Plus some of these guys basically look after the water effect. I don't want to interfere with that. I'm going to select maybe an object. Okay, I probably needed to turn on at least one light to change the position. I kind of got too excited and turned off everything. So all right, I'm just going to press F and position my camera first, because I really need to know where my camera is going to go. And once we take care of the daytime, I'm probably going to dedicate a chapter to doing nighttime as well. I think this scene has got the potential to do nighttime as well. It's going to be really cool. Let's say something like that should do the trick, I guess. So that's good. I can go and turn off the light source, and we're in the dark. Scary stuff. All right, I'm just going to bring this panel up a little. We've got world settings and details of any node that I create. I'm going to collapse, and we are going to start from scratch. Now, we did go over some of these tools here, and if you remember, the first one that we introduced in terms of getting the outdoor scene set up was directional light. So as soon as you bring directional light, it brings or injects life into the scene. This actor just emits light from infinity into your scene. The position of this actor is not important. The size of this actor is not important. The orientation, on the other hand, is very important. So if I press E on the keyboard and start rotating this actor, you can see how it will have an impact on our scene. And from the get-go, from early on, you really need to think about, all right, what am I going to do? What would be the directional light that I want? What would be the lighting setup? And that will define sort of your strategy moving forward. So that's the only actor that I add to my scene without even thinking when I'm dealing with outdoor scenes. So yep, that's good. Let's move forward. We have this guy in the scene. However, let's go over some of these attributes and see what we have. So temperature, I'm probably going to leave the temperature as is. With regards to the shadows and the softness of the shadows, you can play around with the softness of these shadows, make it crisper, make it a bit blurrier. But for now, I think the default looks pretty good. Indirect lighting intensity, you can see some of these guys are really, really dark. It's not going to brighten up the ground level. You can see how black the ground level is. I intentionally angled the light in a way that we get pitch black shadow on the ground because I want to show you the solution for it. But for all the indirect lights, the light that hits the ground and bounces on the wall, you can use this indirect lighting intensity to brighten that up. Again, be very careful about it because something like that looks very, very unrealistic. I'm just going to bring it back to normal, to be honest with you. At this point, we're not going to have any major changes in here. So let's see what the next step would be. The order of adding actors is totally optional. What I usually do right after this section is adding sky atmosphere component. And the reason that I want to do that, because there is a link between your directional light and sky atmosphere. Let's see how we can do that. If I go into visual effects, we have sky atmosphere component. I can just drag and drop and bring it into the scene. This actor, or this component, I should say, is a physically based sky and atmosphere, which kind of brings time of the day feature where you can have sunrise, you can have sunset, you can have clear blue sky in the scene, and really takes the look of the scene to the next level, because this right now is not really believable. There is no blue sky. However, when you add that to your scene, nothing happens because this component works with directional light. How? In directional light, there is an option. If I scroll all the way, it's usually towards the end, we've got atmosphere and cloud. And the first option is atmosphere sunlight. It's been turned off. This needs to be turned on every time you would like these two guys to work together. So I'm going to select the sunlight. I'm going to go to atmosphere and cloud, and I'm going to enable it. As soon as I enable it, I get my sky. While we're not going to talk about the index, just so you know, you can add two directional lights to your sky atmosphere component, give them an index. For example, daytime is going to get an index of 0, moon is going to get index of 1, and play around with it. But we are going to talk about this in later lessons. For now, we're dealing with basics, so I'm not going to get ahead of myself and sort of overwhelm you. Just so you know, you can add up to 2 lights to this sky atmosphere component. Very, very useful note. Again, the position, the location of it doesn't matter. The rotation scale doesn't matter. The functionality is what it counts. And if I go into the option box, you can see that we've got the ground level. Now, the sky is a super giant sphere. The top hemisphere is blue. The bottom hemisphere is black. The reason that we don't see the black color because it's been blocked by all the objects that I have in the scene. Now, once you set up your directional light and sky atmosphere component, it's time to bring one of the most powerful tools that you have in lighting in Unreal, and that is skylight. So we didn't really talk much about skylight because a Cornell box was very limited and I didn't want to demonstrate something that doesn't really show the power of skylight. But let's go ahead and bring a skylight from lighting menu. Now look at this dark area in the bottom left side of the screen, and we couldn't really even get that to brighten up using indirect bounces from our directional light, because the way to brighten those up is through skylight. Let's see. Look at how bright this looks now. So again, as I explained in the previous video, look at the icon, and that icon explains its functionality. This actor captures all the lights that is available, you know, in your sky, all the temperature, color, and injects it to your scene. It's like spraying that color to your scene. We get a tint of blue here because the sky is blue. Now, we did talk about mobility and how we need to be mindful of mobility. You know, static is the cheapest way of running things, but in the gameplay, you won't be able to really move the light. You know, the light is not going to interact with your moving objects. With stationary, you can kind of have that to some degree, where you can play around the intensity, you can play around with temperature or brightness, but it has to stay stationary. That's why we call it stationary. With movable, it's the most dynamic but the most powerful, and we get dynamic lighting in the scene. Usually with sky atmosphere component, it is set to movable by default, and of course in skylight we definitely want to have that set to movable. So you can see how it improves the look of our scene using all the color information that it's getting from the sky and kind of injects it to your scene. Now, one thing I didn't explain in the previous session was what type of color temperature. So you can use SLS capture scene, which uses your sky atmosphere. Another option is to receive lighting information from a specified cube map. So instead of the scene that you have, you give this a map, and few maps are available to us. You can see HDRI, daylight gives us a slightly different temperature. You can have your own map as well, of course, and this one is super bright, as you can see, because we've got a sort of a highlight, a big highlight right in the middle, but again, totally optional. I will be using this SLS capture scene for now. I think this works just fine for us. And speaking of which, I believe the intensity that I have in this scene just a little bit too much. So I'm just going to go to intensity from 10 lux. I'm going to go to maybe 7 lux or even 6. Yeah, that works much better, more realistic. It was just way too, maybe 7 is better. It was way too harsh. Now, with this skylight, another feature that I would like to get, I'm just going to switch back in here. Another feature that I would like to get is real-time capture. I would like to have that on, and you don't see an immediate change in here, but that basically allows me to have time of the day simulation using Control L when you select your directional light. So I can select my directional light, hold Control L, don't let go of that, and then you can move your mouse. If I press Control L, you can move your mouse and basically get nighttime, dawn, dusk, so on and so forth. You can actually spot your sunlight and kind of bring it over here. You can see the gorgeous bokeh that happens and basically takes place in here. So that is totally possible. Control L, and that is real-time capture. Now, if you don't do that, I'm just gonna move that somewhere, and I need to select the skylight for it, and you need to go in here and recapture manually, which used to be a thing where you set your lights to stationary or to static. Now, another important attribute, if I scroll down, is this sky distance threshold, and that is the distance from the skylight that any geometry should be seen as part of the sky. So I usually bring this way down to something like 1 or so. So the sky can be seen on reflective objects, and that helps me to kind of get a slightly better reflection of objects. Now, we don't see much of a change here because, as I said at the beginning, not much is reflective in this scene. The water is, but we're not even close to it. So I'm just going to snap this back to where it was because this doesn't really change much in the scene. And of course, if I just move this, and probably I'm going to use Control L to bring the sun back like so. If I go into my skylight, I can change the intensity. You can see how bright this can get. So 2, 5, and you can see it really brightens up the scene. A bit of unrealistic, to be honest with you. I'm just going to snap it back to maybe 2. 1 is the default and 2 works better. So pressing Control L, I want to bring this sun down just to show you something really cool. Now, one thing that is really cool, and that is on the directional light, is light shaft. And we did mention it in the previous scene, but we really didn't turn it on. So let's go here and turn on light shaft and turn on light shaft bloom. This will have an impact on God rays that you may want to have in the scene. You can see how beautiful, sort of interesting look this may create. If you have vegetation in the scene, I think that's the one that you're going to use a lot. There are some attributes in there too that you can kind of explore and create all sorts of crazy stuff. But again, that may not be something that we are going to use, but just so you know, this is available to you and you can definitely make use of it. So let's kind of snap back to where we were in here. So I'm just going to play around with it a little bit and bring the sun closer. Yep. That's what I like, because I really would like to have those shadows on the ground. That's much better. Now, all we need to do is just to bring clouds into the scene. We have a clear blue sky, but no volumetric clouds. And we can definitely add that actor using visual effects menu. So I can go in here and go into visual effects and volumetric clouds and bring that actor in, and voila, you can see how much this adds to the scene, to the personality, to the look of the scene. Now, you may look back and say, oh, I think we need to change a few things. That's totally fine. For example, I noticed that now the directional light, the intensity of the light is a bit much. So I'm going to reduce that to something like 5. And you can see how it will have an impact on the clouds. For example, if I put that to 10, you can see clouds are much wider. You can have certain controls over clouds as well. So if I go to volumetric cloud, it's a shader based cloud. So you can actually go in here and kind of look it up. That's the volumetric cloud shader that we have. You can change a few things. You can make it more of a powdery looking. You can change the scale of each puff, make it more scatter. Certain things that you can do with this volumetric cloud material, but just so you know, that is available to you and you can definitely use it. I'm going to go to skylight and probably change the intensity scale to 0.5. I think it's a little bit much. Oh, that is actually too low. Maybe something like 1 can do the trick for us. And at any point of time, you can change between these guys. You know, this is available to you as well, but I'm going to kind of leave it at real-time capture with no cube map. So that really is it. Of course, I can talk about all of these attributes, but for now, I'm just going to leave it almost as default settings. The idea was to show you all the complementary actors that you can bring into the scene. And it is important to know how directional light, skylight, and volumetric cloud, and this little guy, sky atmosphere, work together to make this scene. So how bright the day is, up to you. How much indirect light you want to apply to your scene. It's of course according to the reference. It's your artistic discretion, artistic decision that you have. Obviously, you need to work very closely with your reference and you need to know what you're doing. So at the end of the day, it would be definitely your call. I'm going to lower this intensity. It was way too bright. But that's pretty much the main building blocks, the main components that you need to use inside Unreal Engine 5 to have a very simple, pleasing outdoor lighting scenario into your scene. Now, before we get to the next chapter, I would like to show you a very useful window, a very useful tool that allows you to light easier and more efficiently in the scene. Now, you may be wondering why the scene is pitch black. Simply because I removed all the lights from my scene. Now, in order to see something, I can switch to unlit view because I really don't want to create any light at the moment. So Alt 3 to go unlit. And this is something that we covered in our very first video. Now let's see how we can recreate a basic version or a simpler version of what we did in this session using a brand new window. Now the problem I had so far was, I'm not sure if you had noticed, but every single time I made a light or created an actor, I had to go through a long list of scrolls to find what I want, and that can take time. Not to mention you may forget the location of certain tools or certain properties. So the tool that I do use for my lighting scenes is, if I go to Windows, is called Environment Light Mixer. If I click on it, this is a single window that allows you to edit all the components, lighting components that you want, and it cherry picks all the important attributes and make them available to you in one window. Look what we have here. First things first, we have the toolbar, the top section, which is the toolbar. What toolbar does, it gives you all the components that you need. Skylight, atmospheric light 1, atmospheric light 2, because if you remember, we talked about it. You can have 2 index assigned to your directional light. Sky atmosphere, volumetric cloud, and height fog, which we haven't talked about yet because I'm planning on explaining this in the next chapter. But let's say I would like to create an atmospheric light, which is a directional light. Now I can switch back to lit, or I can press Alt 4, and there I have my light set up. Now, what I really like about this way of adding lights is controlling the amount of property details that you get. Look how small this rollout is right now, because we set the amount of details, visible amount of details, to minimal. Now I have only access to the important stuff, the ones that we actually talked about during our sessions. We have access to intensity, light color, indirect lights, volumetric scattering, and cloud scattering, which gets enabled by default. Fantastic. If you would like to see more, you can switch to normal and you get access to light shaft, so on and so forth. But at any point of time, to avoid the clutter, you can just switch to minimal. Now, I'm not sure if you remember what the next step was. After creating our directional light, which is our atmospheric light, next step was to create a sky. Again, it pops up in the same menu. We set this to minimal, and look what a different look that is compared to all of these details that you need to go through. You just have access to the important stuff. Multi-scattering, what sort of color you would like to assign to the ground, which we don't even see, but it accelerates the process. Next, skylight. We would like to bring skylight, and it actually shows it in the same window. One thing you would like to check with your skylight is to make sure that it is movable. It is movable because Lumen is enabled, and you have access to its intensity, light color, so on and so forth. Everything is in front of you. Right after that, when we're happy with the result, we can add volumetric clouds. Again, it pops up in the same window. Ideally, if you have the secondary monitor, you can just pop that in to the secondary monitor. You can dock that in if you want, dock it here, 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 and have it as like a side panel or as a floating panel. I usually move it to the side and maximize it in my secondary monitor, but it is available to you if you want to use it. So you can see how convenient this is, to be honest with you, as opposed to going through a long list of attributes and try to find what's going on. You have one window to rule them all. Very convenient, very easy to use. So I highly recommend you to use Environment Light Mixer, which is accessible via Windows Environment Light Mixer. If you already have light in the scene, and the good thing about it is you can even go shorter than this list. For example, in your directional light, if you think you only need to play around with intensity, let's say I'm going to place the intensity, set it to 8 lux. And I'm like, look, I'm not interested in light color or indirect scattering. I'm only going to change intensity. You can easily go to settings and show or hide things. For example, show only modified properties, and it gives you only intensity to play around with. How cool is that? So even you can save more space on this window and have a very clean, useful set of properties that you use for your lights if you want to. I think that's enough content for one video. Let's go to the next video and I will show you how to turn this very scene into nighttime. We're pretty much going to use what we've learned in this session, plus a few more tips and tricks on blueprint materials and fog system inside Unreal Engine 5, and I cannot wait to share this with you. So let's pick up where we left off and continue with that in the next video. Thank you very much and see you in the next video.